Hello there my beloved Batties, and welcome to another episode of Truth Behind the Tale, the series where I take a look at some of our most famous fairy tales and delve into their real world historical and cultural origins. And today we're going to be taking a look at Thumbelina and Tom Thumb. But before we begin, a quick announcement. Merch! Yes, it has finally happened. The Batty Brigade now has its official line of merchandise. The store is very small at the minute. There's only some t-shirts and some pillows, a mug and a tote bag. But if there's anything in particular that you would like to see, please do let me know and I will consider adding it to the store. The Batty Brigade logo has been zhuzhed up a little bit. It's got blue accents now to really make it pop. And now you can showcase your beloved Battiness in style. The link to the merch will be down in the description. So if you're interested in that, please go and check it out. On with the video. For this episode, I'm going to do something similar to what I did when I covered Jack and the Beanstalk and Jack the Giant Killer at the same time, because Tom Thumb and Thumbelina are reasonably similar and it's kind of difficult to talk about Thumbelina without also mentioning Tom Thumb. We'll start with Thumbelina since it's arguably the more well-known of the two to the average modern person. It was written by Hans Christian Andersen and was published in 1835 in the second edition of his Fairy Tales Told for Children. As with many of his stories, Andersen created the fairy tale himself, but also as with many of his stories, he took inspiration from many different angles. A real person who may have influenced Thumbelina is Simon Meisling, a tutor from Andersen's grammar school in Denmark. He was a balding, middle-aged classicist, and he would often take out his ire on the young Andersen, at one point telling him that he would never amount to anything. To quote, "You are a stupid boy who will never make it." One hypothesis suggests that the learned but very unsympathetic mole character in Thumbelina is directly based on this tutor. Aside from the potential real-life influence there are many commentaries and analyses of Thumbelina. Andersen's biographer Jackie Woodschlager also suggests that this was the first of Andersen's tales to place an emphasis on difference and the sufferings that one can experience when they are perceived as an outsider. Thumbelina's experiences range from unwanted attention as a curiosity to mockery and amusement, with not a shred of acceptance. Andersen would explore similar themes in The Ugly Duckling, but Thumbelina can be seen as a parallel of his own experiences of wanting to be accepted by the upper classes. The inclusion of the swallow is also a potential connection to Andersen himself. He identified with it as a migratory bird since his own life was heavy with travel, and it can also be seen as a symbol of the poetic soul. Folklorist Maria Tatar has also said that Thumbelina can stand as an allegory for arranged marriages, with the character of Thumbelina being a runaway bride who must remain true to her own heart. She also draws parallels with Hindu influences. In Hindu belief, the innermost self or soul is the size of the thumb and resides in the heart of all living beings, both human and animal. This detail may have travelled from the East into Europe to form the basis of Tom Thumb and, by extension, Thumbelina. Indeed, both of these characters seek transfiguration and redemption in their respective stories. This Eastern influence may not be too great a leap of logic to make, since Andersen read the Arabian Nights and he did use Eastern stories as starting points for some of his other fairy tales, including The Emperor's New Clothes and The Tinderbox, but the extent to which he was aware of the origin of these influences is unknown. In regards to Thumbelina, he also took inspiration from other stories featuring miniature peoples, including Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, Micromegas by Voltaire, and a couple of stories by E.T.A. Hoffmann. One Hoffmann story in particular, Princess Brambilla, features an image which is strikingly similar to Thumbelina's birth, a tiny being inside a flower. And of course we have the influence of Tom Thumb, which takes us nicely into his story. Tom Thumb has been around for a lot longer than Thumbelina. It was actually the very first fairy tale to be printed in English back in 1621. It's a 40-page pamphlet with Londoner Richard Johnson listed as the author, as his name appears on the last page. The title, in full, is The History of Tom Thumb the Little, for his small stature surnamed, King Arthur's dwarf, whose life and adventures contain many strange and wonderful accidents, published for the delight of merry time spenders. So, you know, an easy title to remember. The version given in that story says that during the time of King Arthur, Tom's father wished for a son, even if he was no larger than his thumb. His wife gave birth to Tom 3 months later, with the Queen of the Fairies and her attendants as midwives. Tom was a mischievous trickster character, and after being swallowed alive several times by various characters, found himself at King Arthur's court. The Queen of the Fairies finds him sleeping on a rose and leaves him several gifts. Again, this brings to mind Thumbelina, before he then sets off on even more adventures. But my childish sense of humour dictates that I cannot talk about this without mentioning that the earliest printed English fairy tale featuring King Arthur and the Queen of the Fairies is not above a fart joke. At one point, Tom is baked into a pudding which is given to a peddler. When the peddler is later crossing a stile, he farts very loudly and Tom calls him out on it. The peddler is so shocked that he drops the pudding, after which Tom eats his way out and runs home. And the very first thing to eat Tom alive is a cow, which is then given a laxative and passes him out in quote-unquote a cow turd. I am so childish. However, the earliest allusions to Tom Thumb as a character go back to the 1500s, over a century before that first printing. In Reginald Scott's Discovery of Witchcraft from 1584, Tom Thumb is described as a supernatural being which can be used to frighten children alongside witches and elves. But if we go back a little bit further to 1519, we find that there might have actually been a real person named Tom Thumb. Yeah, I was surprised by this as well. In Tattershall, Lincolnshire, a grave slab in Holy Trinity Church says that somebody by the name of T. Thumb died in 1620 at the age of 101. And interestingly, the grave itself only measures 16 inches in length. While there's no definitive link between T. Thumb and Tom Thumb, he was already a very popular, well-known character by the time the booklet was printed in 1621. He was subsequently referred to in several texts from the late 16th and early 17th centuries, and his tale of being swallowed by and escaping from various animals continues to be printed throughout Britain. It was being sold in America as early as 1686, and in 1630 a version was published, which was entitled Tom Thumb, His Life and Death, wherein is declared many miraculous acts of manhood, full of wonder and strange merriments, which little knight lived in King Arthur's time, and famous in the court of Great Britain. Another quick and snappy title, as you can see. The story of Tom Thumb was reprinted so many times over the next 100 years, it's too much for this video to list them all now. But the highlights I'll mention included a 1730 play about him by playwright William Fielding, who later reworked it the following year as part of The Tragedy of Tragedies. This also formed the basis of an opera written by Kane O'Hara, and another stage version written by Eliza Haywood and William Hatchett. Although Tom's story was originally intended for adults, by the mid-1700s it was starting to be told to children more and more, and by the mid-1800s it was confined solely to the nursery. The vulgarity was sanitised, and the entire thing underwent the moralisation which was common for many fairy tales at the time. Tom Thumb wasn't only limited to England, however. There are several variants of stories containing thumb-sized people from all over the world. The Brothers Grimm collected 2 tales featuring thumb-sized characters, Thumbling and Thumbling's Travels in 1819. We also have Hop o' My Thumb from France, collected by Charles Perrault, Thumbikin from Norway, and Ishun Bushi from Japan. I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly. Further adaptations and versions of Tom Thumb appeared throughout the 20th century, particularly in film. Legendary animators Chuck Jones and Ub Iwerks, the early partner of Walt Disney, produced animated versions in the 1930s and 40s. Stories based on the character appeared in the Beano comic from the 1930s to the 1950s, and to bring us full circle, in 2002 The Adventures of Tom Thumb and Thumbelina was released. In truth, these 2 characters are just the tip of a very large iceberg. Thumberg? Of stories which extend throughout the world and throughout history. But they are certainly the 2 most well known, and while they may be tiny, their legacy is definitely not. Thank Thank you very much for joining me for this episode of Truth Behind the Tale. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please give it a big thumbs up if you did. And please don't forget to leave me a comment and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It would be great to have you as part of our little Batty family. I'm still getting used to this new setup, so I ask you to please kindly bear with me, and also while I look for a new camera. I'm probably going to have to stick with this one for a little while yet, but as soon as I find a new camera, it will be put to good use. So thank you very much for joining me. Be sure to tune in on the last Tuesday of next month for the next episode of Truth Behind the Tale. Take care of yourselves, stay safe, and I'll see you all again very soon in another video. Bye!